Okay. Okay, we're up and running. Good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to look at some of the images we talked about last week. I'll share my screen. There we go. So you should be able to see that. Now, are you getting my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got a small problem with my large monitor today, deciding to go very dark. So I can't use my second screen at the moment. I can't see it, but never mind. We'll survive. I am going to put all your faces on the top screen anyway.
Yeah,
And
make,
then
make,
if I can't
make,
see you, or
make the picture full screen then.
I am going to do. Here we go. There we go. I've been looking at ideas because obviously I keep seeing some of your photographs, and I'm looking at ways in which we can give value for your classes in helping you work more on your own images rather than anything that we supply. Now, as I say, a lot of these online classes that you see, and I've looked at one or two recently, and I keep stipulating, just like the magazines you can buy, they only use images, they only use examples they know will work. So you'll go back and look again because, oh, look at that, I can do that. And then you try it on your own images, and guess what? It doesn't always work, does it? So what I want to try and do is to get you to understand a little bit more of the underpinning uses of Lightroom and Photoshop, because we only scratched Photoshop again recently, so that you can work on your own images with more confidence. And I think that is very key. There are a couple of things that came out in Lightroom recently in the last edition, which obviously masking is part of it, which you've not really got to grips with yet. And one in particular is the tone curve and why and what and how we should use it. And a lot of you might say, well, actually, I don't want to use it. It's not what I want to want. Now, I grant you that the curves panel in Lightroom is incredibly good, incredibly powerful. My question to you all is, I know Margaret actually works on individual images, and probably a lot of you don't. You work on your own images for your own benefit, for your own pleasure, and you enjoy it, which is absolutely fine. And potentially curves, you might say, is a little bit, I probably won't go into so much detail. I just tidy them up and that will do us. However, if you get a good understanding of the tone curve, you might decide that, yeah, actually, I like this image. I'm going to do a little bit more on it. And I'm going to be a lot more precise in how I edit it. Because remember, Lightroom is about getting your images in from A to B as fast as possible. Hence, we have presets. We have all these various panels that we have in basic, so we can do monochrome or color very quickly. So it's all about doing things with as little effort as possible to get the maximum benefit or maximum result. And Therese has very openly said that, yes, she uses the auto on all images. There's nothing wrong with that. And the reason being is in auto, it looks at your darks, your lights, your shadows, highlights, and it tries to make some adjustments that would give the maximum amount of information from that picture. The only downside of that is sometimes there are occasions where it makes some areas brighter or darker than you'd want, but it's a great starting point. So there's nothing wrong with using the auto. And the auto is very similar to what happens in your camera when you take a picture and you create a JPEG. It applies the settings that are on your menus or your modes within your camera, and it creates that JPEG image. Because don't forget, when you shoot with your camera, you're shooting raw, and raw is raw data. It actually captures what it believes it sees. It applies no changes at all. And those changes that you apply are those that you put in from, in this case, from in Lightroom. There is one new feature that I'm not going to touch today in detail, but I'm going to tell you, is that let's, for example, say we have a portrait. So I'm going to just upgrade. Don't forget you've got some images which you need to download in a minute. I'm going to go back to, whoopsie daisy, my library panel, and I'm just going to upgrade my masking class because I've added some images to it. So you might want to do this in a moment yourselves. There we go, I've got 5 pictures. And I'm going to just add them. into a Lightroom. I have not got an image here that I want to use at the moment, but I have got, for example, we talk about placing pictures within pictures. Let's say you want to put a face, you've been somewhere, but the background's not as nice, but you've got a better background and you want to apply that. This is just a round example of what they've added into Lightroom. Now, if I was to take an image today, let's say, I don't know, let's say this one, and I wanted to take that into Photoshop, and I also wanted to put this picture in it as well. So this could be a portrait, this could be an image, and you want to put the face of this person on here. It might be that you stand in front of the house. You just bought this house or this church or whatever, and you want to show the world, here I am outside my house. I might want to do it here. In fact, I'll tell you what I will do. For next week, I'll take a picture of the front of this house and a picture of me or Stephanie or India Rose, whatever, with their permission. And I will use that as an example of how to bring the images into Photoshop. Now, we all know if I have an image like this, and I've got two images, we can actually go up to our photo, and it'll bump, come on, wake up. It's gone off the top of the screen. I'll make it a bit smaller. Sorry, Roger, I'm just going to make it a bit smaller because it's got the top screen on at the moment and it's trying hardest to fit them all on. Oh, dear. Bomb dear. Oh, my top screen's going berserk. It is flickering. It's doing all horrible things. I'm going to disconnect the top screen, guys. 1 minute. See if it'll come back to life now. There we go. I've got it back now. Wow, that was really odd. Okay, sorry about that. Normally we would do, what's the shortcut key to take pictures into Photoshop?
Command E.
Command E, yeah, Command E. So we can use Command E. And of course, when we drop this panel down, if we go to Edit In, we normally get Edit in Photoshop and then any other software that you have. I have PTGui, I have Ricoh. So I've got these here, PTGui, I've got Ricoh, and of course I've got all the On1 software, which I'll remove those because we've now got On1 Raw, so those are no longer applicable. And those are set in your presets folder so you can create your own editing software. I think there's one on the market right now where you can take a picture into a software and it makes it into like a moving picture. So it like puts snow and faces, or if it's a waterfall, the waterfall looks like it's flowing, and so you can turn your photographs into a video. So I'll show you that one day. I wouldn't buy it, but anyway, it's there. But when we go into Photoshop, let's say, for example, I'm going to cover this, but I'm just going to explain it so we can get ourselves ready. If I've made some changes within here, for example, let's say I've been in the basic panel, and I'll better change the process version. It's doing this again. By the way, there's an update to Camera Raw at the moment in your apps. It overcomes a problem apparently with 2 new cameras and a conversion when you go into Photoshop. So it's one of those you do need to upgrade to. So if you go into your apps on your cloud or whatever, whichever way you download or sort of synchronize your applications with Adobe, do your Camera Raw, because it's one that said it needs to be done because there is a bug. So let's say I make all these changes. I'm going to make some change to the highlights. I've got an exposure. I've made a contrast. I'm going to pull up some shadows, and I'm just making a few simple, just so you can see I've done it. Okay. Now, the trouble is when we go into Photoshop, what do? We pass all this information through, and what does it do? So if I open this in Photoshop, what will it do?
Appear on your screen.
Well, it will definitely appear on your screen unless you've got my screen at the top, which is not working today. Well, it creates a new file. Yeah, because we say in our preferences panel in Lightroom Classic that when we go into Photoshop, we create a new file, which is a TIFF. We chose TIFF. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we create that image. So it takes all these settings with it into Photoshop. And if I'm going to put a face on there as well, and then I suddenly realize, ooh, I made that a bit too dark. what do you have to do? You have to come back into Lightroom and do it again, don't you? Because you've created that file. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, it is, yeah. So if I came into Photoshop now with this thing and I suddenly looked at this picture and for some bizarre reason, oh, look what I did. Oh, God, I made a mess. Well, normally in the edit, we can go to our photo, edit in, and we can edit as a smart object. So what does that mean?
You can change things.
Yes. So if I open as a smart object, I can keep open all these settings and changes within Photoshop. But wait a minute, if this is Lightroom and I'm going into Photoshop, how can I gain access to those controls?
Camera raw.
Yeah, because if I create a smart object, it creates a smart object and a smart layer within Photoshop. So what would happen is that you would open it up and then you would say, right, made a mistake. I must have clicked on the exposures. I clicked on it for some reason and I brought it in. You can then click on the smart object icon. And then whilst you're in there, you can open up Camera Raw, which links to Lightroom. So you can make changes in Camera Raw, which also reflect in Lightroom, and carry on working without having to go back and recreate another file and going backwards and forwards. So you can make these changes on the fly. Now there is a new one that's just come in that has not been widely publicized, which I picked up on the other day. And this guy that's got this picture from here, said the same thing. Why didn't he tell us about this? Because it is brilliant. Is now not only can you open a smart object, you can open smart object in layers within Photoshop. So whereas before, if I wanted to put this face on this image in Photoshop, using settings from Lightroom, I would have to take them in individually and then stack them up and change them. Yeah, do you agree? And the problem is I'd have to open up two folders, two things with smart objects and bring one onto the top of the other one and build it up from there. Well, now you don't have to do that. You can open smart object layers, a smart object in layers in Photoshop. And it is brilliant. And we'll do this next week. We'll look at this and we'll make some pictures up to suit it. So that's what we're going to look at now. So that is a new one that came out in Lightroom that people have not picked up on, and it is really, really good. And I tried it the other day, and I did again this morning just to check, and it is very, very good. Absolutely brilliant. So that's what we're going to look at next week. But this week we are going to look at, and I've sent you some pictures. We're going to talk about tonal ranges, and we're going to talk about curves, and we're going to talk about these colors. Okay. So do you want to just grab those files? I've sent them to WhatsApp. If you want, I can send them through the class now. They're only small files. Which would you prefer to download them from?
Through the class.
Through the class?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to create a chat window then, and then I'm going to send them to you. Oh, masking class curves. I think if I could do that. My computer. Masking class and curves. I'm not sure. I think I'd only send one at a time in the chat window. I'll send that one first. So you've got one on its way. Second one coming through. There's another one. They're only small files, so you should be okay. It shouldn't take long to download. And the last one, the house.
What do you do when you do that? Do you just
So you should have 4 files now.
It can ask you where to save it. I've got my desktop in there.
So you should end up with these 4 files, which is for masking, which is these. I would create a little folder within your masking class called curves, like I've done, and stick them in. And you should end up with these 4 pictures.
Right.
I'll reset that one now.
There's one not trying to come through and won't come through. Yeah, yeah. The one after it's gone, all right.
Okay, do you want to download those? I'll give you a minute.
Yeah.
If you get stuck, just shout up. So every time you click on each one, you can put it into your it goes to downloads, and you can open up in Lightroom, you can add them and then move them, or you can drag them into your downloads or into your new folder called Curves. You already done it, Roger?
Yep.
Has Ron
So-
done it as well?
These, so is Tony's.
Woohoo!
The one house, though it says house, it's taking ages to download. It's yours.
It's only a small file.
It's less than halfway across.
Do-do-do-do-do.
Is it? That's on this one as well, look. I blurred that one out. I blurred the background. That's on Tony's laptop.
Yeah,
there.
mine's about that. It didn't ask me where to put it though, with the others
Still didn't
did.
check for updates, did you not? You got an update on it?
Yeah.
You'd imagine it'd be
I
down.
always get confused with this. I don't know why. So if I save it to my desktop, yeah.
Well, you don't need to save it. You're going to save it to your desktop. You can. It'll go to your downloads. Open up Lightroom, add them in your, or you can actually, once you put them in your downloads, don't forget, instead of adding them, you can move them. So open up your import panel and say move these from your downloads file to a new folder in your masking class called Curves. Do you want me to help you do with that?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's share your screen then. And then they can all watch on the big screen, so they can all do the same if they wanted to.
You get covering downloads, and then rather than
I don't know why I
going
get
to Lightroom,
confused with this, because
rather
I used to be able to
add
do
them,
it,
you
no
move
problem.
Goes into a new folder.
Has it shared, Gary?
You know, not yet. I'm just looking at Teresa falling asleep.
Right, let's,
Yeah, then Linda.
Yeah, it's not.
He said it's not shared. Click
I
on share.
thought Diane was knitting, but she's obviously just trying to tie fingers together.
I can't make this any smaller.
You're still sharing some other screen, Gary. Linda that won't allow her to share.
Wait a minute, let me just check in case, because the new. Try again, Linda. Yeah, try again.
There you go. They click on the one up there. Look.
There you go. We're on. Okay. So get Lightroom open. Don't forget any dot underneath any icon on here. Okay, we've got it. I'm going to now request control, and I'll do it with you, Linda. So hopefully now, if you just let me have control for a second, I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so everybody can see it. So can everybody see Linda's screen?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if you wish, once you've downloaded them from the chat, you can go to import, and instead of saying add, you can move them. So we'll go to downloads. And we've just sent the house. You've only got one of them there, Linda, not all four, but let's just use this one to start off. And what we're saying is we go from your hard disk in downloads and we're going to move them to, and then we can tell it here what we're going to move it to. So we're going to go to the masking class and we're going to put in a subfolder called curves. Okay, so what we're telling it to do, to recap, on the left-hand side, it says from your hard drive at the top there, in a folder called downloads, and we've selected a picture. You need the others as well. And then we're going to move, because in the middle here at the top, instead of copy as DNG, we're going to move them to your desktop in a folder called masking class, and we're going to make a subfolder called curves and put it in there. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to move it. So we can click on import now. And hopefully, there it is in the masking class. Now, this is our problem is you've got full masking class and masking class. Never mind. We're going to delete that one because it's driving me mad. We're going to put that one in masking class. There you go. So now in there, you should have a folder called curves and you've got one picture in it. Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to remove this folder because you've got two of the same. There you go. And that's called for masking class. So if you want to download the other ones, just quickly. So what we can do, I can't see your chat window. So you might want to look, see where it is. So download, that's it. Find chat, find the other files, and click on each one and download them, put them into your downloads folder.
They don't seem to.
Gary,
Yep.
the house one automatically went to downloads, but when I go to put it in Lightroom, the file is grayed out.
Ooh, interesting. Should we share your screen while Linda's downloading those others?
Yeah.
Da, 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 da.
Oh no, the house is there, it's the other one.
Hmm.
You've got the house, you've got the house, you've got the road. You've got the green out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the house.
Got the house, yeah.
You've got the road one.
How did you go? Show me what you did.
Right, okay. Let's have a look. Gosh, you got a lot of your downloads, haven't you? You've got a full folder. Let's have a look with you.
Down there.
I'm looking there.
In here. Oh, you've done it that way.
No, sorry, it's not there. Sorry.
Okay, what we're going to do, Margaret, we're going to uncheck all
Sorry, Linda.
I've got
and
some.
check that one. And then I'm going to just move my meeting chat to one side. Minimize that because we don't need that out. We don't need that. We're going to move. Click on the word move at the top. There we go. Move.
Yeah.
I'm going to minimize file handling because we don't need that. We don't need that.
With my screen.
It's a bit easier. And you've got, so you put it into a folder called masking class curves, which is perfect. And then we should be able to move it into there. And there it is.
Just to click on the picture.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've got smart previews open. Do you know that, Margaret?
Yeah.
Pardon?
You've got smart previews set in your folders.
I've got that already.
So when you import it, you're asking it to create smart preview, which is fine, but it obviously takes memory.
You're in
Yeah.
your downloads.
So if you don't want that in future, when you come to do your import here, which I'll do,
I can't
Downloads.
see what you're doing, Gary.
I'm going to try. There you go. Look. So when we do up here,
Yeah.
we've got build smart previews. Can you see it open at the top right corner?
You've
Yeah.
not got them.
So if you don't want smart previews, you must switch that off.
Why wouldn't you want them?
Well, why would you want them?
Well, I don't know. It's just
Okay.
something-
Well, if everybody's listening, let's tell everybody what that means then, just to make sure they understand. Can you all and the rest of the class hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Teresa,
Teresa.
are you listening?
Margaret's. I've just noticed when we brought some files in for Margaret, it came up with smart preview generated. So Margaret said, well, why wouldn't I want it? Well, my question is, why would you want it? So what is a smart preview? A smart preview is an additional file and a link so that, let's say Margaret's going to London tomorrow and
Import.
she's put this on a little mobile drive, but she didn't want to take that because she don't want to break it or damage it, lose it, because it's got all the pictures on. She could get on the train with a laptop and she can make changes to that picture because she's built a smart preview.
Oh,
When she gets home, she plugs in her disc.
there should
And
be
as
a
soon as
one.
who's talking?
Ron,
Right,
Ron,
sort
yeah,
that out.
you're up, Ron.
shut up, Ron. When Margaret gets back from London and she plugs in her hard disk and she goes to that picture, any changes she's made on the train using her computer without the original file, it will update that file for her. So what I'm saying is smart previews are for those that have their images on an external drive. Should you get on the train without it, normally, Margaret, it would say, can't do it because I can't access the original. Is that correct? You get you get an exclamation mark on all your pictures. But if you've got build smart previews, you could change them without that warning coming up. And when you get back and plug your disk back in, it will update that disk accordingly to any changes you made whilst you weren't plugged into your little disk.
You
So
have
it's,
to quite soon because it gets rid of smart previews after a while, doesn't it?
no, that is purely one-to-one files, not smart previews.
Oh, I see.
Your
Yeah.
smart previews, it just keeps making them, making them, making them, making them. So the question is, do you ever travel or use this computer without your
That one.
drive?
Just
If the answer is no, I don't, I always plug it in and I never need that otherwise, then don't build smart previews because it just adds to the size of your catalog.
Okay. All right.
So that's what smart previews are. Okay.
Mhm.
Cancel that for you. So you don't forget, you jump to switch that off, or you're going to do it?
be able to do
Well, it's up to you. You decide which you want to do.
both.
No, I'll next time I import, I'll
once you've done-
decide.
Yeah. You don't necessarily need the other pictures I've sent you, by the way. Well, you could do with the gradient one, but we can show you how to make a gradient. Do you all know how to make a gradient like that second picture that's shown on Margaret's screen, which is this one?
Nothing showed on Margaret's screen. You
It's-
need to,
I'm showing that one. Margaret's got a gradient like that.
you need to find the one with the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The images I've sent you, this is one we'll work on. But the others, that one is there for your benefit. That is there for your benefit to save. And this one we'll work on. So the two files that you want, definitely need on your computer for today are those two files.
You can do that gradient in Lightroom, can't you?
Not in Lightroom, but you can do it in Photoshop.
Won't do it.
Oh, all right.
So you've got a gradient there. I don't know why why is it called it that long number? I called it gradient. How bizarre. Wowzer.
You need to move it in from your desktop.
Oh, I think it's because, no, it says not renamed any of the others, is it? It has. I think it, oh, I know why. It's because we've downloaded it through the chat room. That's why. Okay, it's okay. So you can, that's a good exercise actually. If you want to rename that, so you can click on that image and rename it and call it gradient rather than that big long blah, 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 file name.
Cool. And just check that one.
Okay, I'll come off of your screen, Margaret, now. Is anybody else stuck? You all okay?
I think so.
Oh, everybody's okay?
Now Linda's still catching up.
Do you want to hand Linda?
No. In the middle,
Yeah.
and pull it into curves and drop it.
It keeps
Yeah.
making,
If you
Gary.
open up your curves. You've got all four now.
Yeah, it keeps making, when I do it, it keeps making another one that I can't get rid of.
Yeah, but that's why, of course, I told you to unclick that other one when you imported it, and you didn't.
Oh, sorry.
You did,
You
'cause you put
naughty girl.
folder.
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
Oh dear, Linda, and it's being recorded. Oh dear. Okay. Let's,
Just hang on a second, Gary. Just click on import.
yeah.
what you've done, look, is you've got a subfolder and in a subfolder, look. And I told you, unclick
Yeah.
that one, other one, and then click on the curves, and that would have put it in there.
Yeah,
Oh, I see. So if I unclick
so
that,
you
right.
made another one.
Yeah, right. You have.
Cancel that now then, anyway, but
Okay, right. Now then, what I need is your full attention now. I can see Louisa's going, oh my God. I'm just gonna stop the recording while I say this. Oh, it's gonna be a blonde moment. Recording in progress. Okay, I'm recording again now. Okay, so let's just talk about it. Let's look at this image and explain what we mean. Now, normally, if we want to work on an image, this is just an image I got off the internet. I listened to this guy. He's also just done an YouTube video on this because he said that people totally misunderstand curves using this new masking process. And a lot of people don't know that there's been changes to the curves panel in Lightroom. So I thought, well, I agree. And I must admit, I've started using it and I like it. So yeah, good. And as I said, Margaret probably would benefit from this because she is quite particular in local and quite refined adjustments for competitions. So let's just explain a little bit about it. So if I had an image like this and we wanted to make changes to it, we could do it using our normal panel on the right, our normal develop panel, quite easily. To some degree, you will be okay. You could also do some color changes. So we could say, well, I wanted a little bit of color change, but as you know, if I use the HSL panel, it is global. So when masking came in, masking allows you to select specific areas of the screen. And the panel for the masking has been developed such that it can detect objects, faces, sky, which in a lot of cases cover most of the things we do in our photography. The only other thing that we can do to be more refined is we can use the brush and paint particular areas. But if you do changes within shadows, highlights, exposure, whites, whatever, you are restricted to zones. So I'm going to explain a little bit about zones. So if I look at this picture on my screen now, and if I do F the full screen, will it let me do this? Yeah. Can you all see that?
yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're working in our image, we have an histogram. Is that correct? And you all know where the histogram is. And you all understand how it works. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Honesty's coming in here. I like this. And you can see from the histogram, those sliders work within those zones. So on the blacks, it only works on the pixels, which are denoted by that yellow square in the top left corner. Can you see that? So if I was to turn that black slider up, what would it do to those pixels?
Darken them.
Yeah.
No, if I'm turning it up,
Oh, lighten them.
it'll lighten them. So it will lift the output value from a darker to a more of a mid-tone, depending on how far you can move. Now, what it's going to do, it's going to analyze those, and you're going to just make them lighter. And if I obviously went to the left and made it darker, it would make them darker. Yeah, would you all agree?
Yeah.
Now, you see that yellow box around it? Yeah?
Yeah.
It only affects the pixels in that range. Does that make sense to you? So from the left to the first, from that line, let me just get this up, option 8. So if I come over here, anywhere on that histogram there will be affected, nowhere else. So it's pretty good, isn't it? It actually works well within the zones of the 5 tonal zones that's in the histogram. The only downside is that if you look at that line through the histogram there, it's a bit of a wiggly line, isn't it? Do you all agree?
Yeah.
So if I was to increase pixel 1, and let's say it goes to pixel 12, all those pixels from 0 or 1, it should be 0 because we go 0 to 255. But from the first pixel to the, let's say the 12th pixel, it will lighten those up. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
But anything past that, it won't affect. So you can see it's a chunky block, isn't it? So if I lift that up, it will lift just like, it's a bit like an elevator. The floor will stay there, but the lift goes up. So anything to the right won't be affected, but anything in that yellow box will be raised. Does that make sense to you?
Mhm.
So if I was to increase that by 3, every pixel in that box would go up 3. Do you understand that one?
Yeah.
If I said move it up 10, every pixel from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of that box will go up 10. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Good. You all understand that? No, but has everybody understood that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
So
all
if I
same.
go now to the shadows and do the same thing in the shadows, anything in that box, if I increased it by 10, all those pixels in that range will go up by 10. Now, remember one thing as well, that inside that box are, in fact, if I move to here, it might make a bit more sense. When I'm in that box, can you see the colors?
Yeah.
So in our box in highlights at the moment, you can see there are quite a lot of highlights, and it's made up of what?
Pixels.
Yeah, and what's specific about that pixels that's on that screen in that little box now? What's specific? They are what? They are colors. They represent pixels of that color. And when they overlap equally, what does it show in that box?
All the same level.
Yeah, what's it? What color is it?
Red, blue, and green.
But when they're all equal amount of pixels, what does it give you?
Right.
Wait, can you see that grey part? Yeah. So that grey part there at the bottom is saying I've got equal amounts of red, green, and blue. And what does that create? White light. Is that correct? So if I come to this image here, and I'll open it up, anywhere where there are, come off, I said, anywhere where green, red, and blue intersect in the middle, we get white light. Is that correct? So if I was to get 3 torches, I think we've done this before in the photography class. If I was to shine 3 circular torches on a wall of green, blue, and red, where they intersect, you get white light. Can you see that in that diagram?
Yeah.
And where the blue overlays the red, we get magenta. And we know if you get green and red, we've got yellow. And anywhere between green and blue, we get cyan. And we all know our printers works in subtractive primaries because it's not projected image. It's actually, you can mix those colors to create. If I was to mix green, blue, and red with paint, what would you get?
What colors? Red, blue, and
So
green.
if I mix the 3 primary colors, which are red, green, and blue, what color would you get if you mix those 3 paints together?
White.
Anybody? Anybody got white? Anybody? So we're mixing paints, not light.
I was going to say purple, but what do I know about anything?
Well, you're pretty close. It's a shitty, horrible, browny, bleh. It's a nondescript, dirty, horrible colour. Because when you mix those together, it just gets darker and it just brings them together. But our printers work with inks. And when we spray inks together and you mix cyan and yellow and magenta, you end up getting back the primary colours. So if I was to spray cyan and magenta on a bit of paper with your printer, guess what colour you get?
Blue.
Blue, yeah. So cyan, yellow, magenta are subtractive primaries. And when you're using your printer, does your printer have a cyan cartridge, a yellow cartridge, a magenta cartridge? And guess what other colour you get?
Cyan. No.
You got cyan, you get yellow, you get magenta. And what other one did they give you in the printer inks when you get the basic? Black. Because if you mix cyan, yellow, and magenta, you get the colours, but you don't get it whether it's dark or light. So you have to have a black. You can't create black from cyan, yellow, or magenta. And you can't create black from green, blue, and red. So black in itself is you need a black ink to get all the colour range. So that's how your printer works, and this is how your screen works. So green, blue, and red light projected together, you create white. Does that make sense? That's why I've sent you this picture, so you can keep that one. Okay, so I'm going to go back now to this one. And you can see from there, we have our histogram. And I've said on this particular one, on this side here, if I was to look at these here, which is made up of, you can see there's some strong red individual colors in that particular part of the picture, and some yellow and some green. Some of the highlights are quite strong in the blue at that range. So these are from this end there in that bottom corner is 0, which is black. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
when I go to the histogram, what is this at this end?
white.
White, correct. So we know that the range in your histograms go from black right through to white. And we know that in this particular one, in the highlights, you can see there are some color and some are quite separated on their own. So the blue is quite strong in one area, the red is quite strong in an area, the yellow is, the green. So you can see there are some strong areas of color which are separate, but down below, generally, there's also where there's equal amounts of red, green, and blue, and it shows up as grey on there, meaning that there are equal amounts of the same colour. Whereas as you go higher up, they have separated. So there's some reds that are separated from the greens and the yellows and the blues. Yeah, does that understand that?
Yep.
Making sense? Yeah. So they're individual at that level, but at the bottom you can see them mixed together. Okay, so we have at the moment 5 tonal areas that we work on: blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites. And we're saying that anything in those boxes in Lightroom, if we was to increase the exposure, it would boost up these middle areas, yeah, as an exposure. Does that make sense? But it won't increase the exposure in the blacks or the shadows or the highlights or the whites. It's just in the exposure. And you'll notice that the exposure range is all the middle areas, which is what we call the gamma point, the middle point of your image. So if I lift that up, you will see the biggest increase in luminance if I turn that up. If I was to go to the highlights and turn that back, it wouldn't turn the midtones, but you'll notice, and this is what confuses people, if I change something in the exposure area, and you then look at the histogram again, you'll notice that the highlights have moved to accommodate the changes within the exposure. So although you're not changing them, it is making some adjustments to the overall histogram. But the problem you have is that when you make any changes in there, it looks at that pixel. So let's say in the exposure panel here, that we start here, and let's say for round figures, let's say 50. And then at that end, it's 150. So any pixels that are within the range of 50 to 150, and we turn that up by 10, will increase every one of those pixels uniformly upwards by 10. Do you understand that? So it adds 10 to each pixel. So pixel 151 will go up 10. Pixel 152 will go up 10. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Each one of those pixels go up by the amount you change on that exposure slider.
Mm-hmm.
And the trouble is, if you do that, you've got to think it's a little bit like cutting. If you cut that out and then move it up. So if I was to cut this yellow box out now, this yellow box, and I moved it up 10 pixels, you would see a little bit of a steep curve there, wouldn't you? They go whoop and they jump up, and at that end they go whoop and jump up. Is that be correct? Because you added 10 to each one. But it doesn't quite work like that, because what Lightroom will do is once it's done that, these pixels will accommodate the change. Otherwise, you see some really ridiculous changes. But that's the principle of how it works. Now then, let's go and have a look at what curves mean. So if I now go to my Lightroom panel and I look here, I'm going to reset all these pictures because I don't understand why it's suddenly decided that I'm gone back to process version 2. How bizarre. Never mind. These things are sent to try us. So if I look at this pixel, if I look at the histogram now, if I hover over the histogram, you can see it shows the zone that I'm going to work on. Can you see it's slightly lighter gray? Can you all see that?
Yeah.
And if I move, and also it tells you underneath here where it says original photograph, I'm working in the shadows, I'm working in the blacks, I'm working in exposure, working on the highlights, and I'm working on the whites. So it's telling you roughly where. And also, if you look down where it says exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, blacks and white. If I hover over those areas, you'll see the value box, which is this bit on the right-hand side, just here, these numbers here, look, watch them change when I hover over them. Let me just get rid of that. So if I hover over the exposure, can you see it's highlighted the exposure value? Can you see that number highlighted?
Yeah.
And if I go to this one here on to shadows, shadows are showing now blacks. So it's actually showing you whereabouts, which slider you'd need to move to change that area there. So if I grab the exposure now and move that up, now you'll notice that I increased it, it's moving everything. So notice it increasing it, it's actually moving it, because as I'm increasing it, when it does another look at the histogram, it looks like it's moving everything to the right. Well, it does in that respect, because it's raising it up and then it adds it to it and then it re-shows you the histogram. So once I've added 10 to it, any pixels, just here, any pixels on that zone here where it says end of the exposure, because it's gone up 10, when I let go and I've sampled it, it suddenly said, okay, these are all 10. Let's all move those pixels up the histogram, because now they're not where they were, they're 10 points higher. So it suddenly, the histogram changes. So all this then starts to look like it moves that way, and it adds that 10 onto these because it's moving it over. So what you're seeing each time is a snapshot before it's changed. So if I take that back, so that pixel, because it's 10 here more, it will actually now go into the highlights. Because it's 10 pixels more, it's going to be in the highlights. So every time I make a change here, you'll notice it's adding it to it, and it's because it's 10 pixels more, in fact, one full stop more, it's going to move that pixel from here up into the histogram further up, and then add it to those pixels that are already there, and then redraw the histogram. So you actually think that what you're doing is, oh, well, it's moving everything. No, it's only affecting that area. Then it shows you the histogram when it's made the changes, and that pixel, any that's gone up 10 that now fall into the highlights, the histogram redraws it to show you it's changed. It does not affect, it doesn't turn these up, it moves everything over because the values have added to it. So you've cut that piece up, you've stuck it on the top, and then you've added them all back up again to create a new histogram. So that's how they work. So they work in blocks. The only downside of that is that it's not very smooth. It's quite blocky. It's a little bit in the old days when Lightroom first came out, there was very easy to do saturation. You turn it up and it was a big blocky thing. And if you did a contrast, it was big and blocky. Now they're smoothing things out and trying to do the maths within it to create a much nicer change. So how does that change to tone curves? Right. Let's look at the tone curve. So now, have you all seen this panel before?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want you to be very honest. How many of you use it? Teresa's already left the class. She's had enough.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I use it.
Yeah,
You,
I do.
you use it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't very often.
Yeah. So why, I'm going to ask a question. I'll ask Roger first. Why don't you use it, Roger?
Because basically I don't understand it a lot.
Correct. And you don't see the benefits of it. That's good. That's a great answer. Now, Margaret and Linda, did someone else say that they've used it before, or they use it?
Yeah.
Do you use it occasionally, or do you, I would hazard a guess you use it for contrast?
Yeah, I do an S-curve,
Yeah,
basically.
so you're doing an S-curve, which is one of the things within it, yeah? And what does an S-curve do?
Well, it sorts out the highlights and the...
It
and the-
creates contrast. So if I was to get this picture here, yeah, and can you see this one? This is blacks to whites. So this is what Linda's saying. She uses it to sort out the highlights. I like that. Good one. But yeah, what you're affected in an S-curve is literally, and I'm going to call it up on here, is literally on here a contrast. So if I click on here, what's going to happen to that picture? If I create a new strong contrast within curves, what's it going to do to that picture?
It'll bring the highlights up first and then the shadows down.
Well done. So it'll increase the light whites and decrease the blacks. And what I'm going to do on here on the histogram, I'm going to make sure that these two are set. Can you see those?
Yeah.
At the moment, whoops, I'm going to lock them on. Now, at the moment, surprisingly, it's showing you that in the black region, there are some clipped areas shown as blue. Is that right?
Yeah.
If I was to go back to the basic and turn the whites up, I should introduce some clipping on there. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That makes sense. So if I turn the blacks up, there, look, I make more black. So anything that's showing blue on that picture there is now pure black. It has a value of
Yeah.
0. And anything on the red part, what's happened to the red areas? What do they represent?
It's clipped.
You're right.
Yeah,
Pure white. been
pure
clipped.
white at 255. So anything. So now we're saying that if I were to look at this picture without those on, that will be solid black and this would be solid white. Yeah, but you can't quite see it because there's a bit of a gradient in there. Yeah. Is that making sense to you all?
Yeah.
So if I reset that now and go back to my curves panel on here and create that strong contrast again, you've got more blacks, you've got more whites, but it still hasn't clipped the whites fully yet, because if you notice on the S curve, and this is what Linda used it for, it's made more changes in the blacks than it has the white. And if I was to grab this now and make it, whoops, more white, you can see it's coming in more from the right-hand side. So we're clipping those whites more, okay? Now notice that we have a histogram. I'm going to go back to a coloured picture so it makes sense. Does everybody know what this little graph means?
Well, it's
a
virtually
histogram.
a histogram. In the black is it mirroring the histogram.
It's mirroring the histogram as a snapshot. That's correct. Yeah. Now, watch what happens when I do this S curve. I'm going to create this S curve. Now, look at the histogram changing. Can you see it at the top?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to bring the blacks down and you can see it's made a change. Can you see that? That's an S curve. And it creates more contrast because it brings the blacks and the whites closer together. Now, tell me something. You just said to me that on the curves panel is a copy of the histogram at the top. Did you say that?
Yeah.
But it didn't change. It's not changed, is it? But hey, wait a minute. Look at the histogram at the top. That's changing.
Yeah.
So why isn't the histogram changing the curves? Because that is that histogram.
No, it just shows you what it was originally.
It's showing you the starting point. Yes. Now then, if I was to go back to here and make some changes and then go back to the tone curve, now it's changed it. It is a snapshot at that time. However, the histogram at the top of your screen is literally real time. The one in the curves, because you're going to make changes, you need to know where to make those changes at the point when you decided that's where I want to start from. So although you've got them both the same, and I'll reset this one, if I was to change anything on here now in that curves panel, it will reflect in the top histogram, but not in the one in the curves panel. Because otherwise you wouldn't know what, every time you moved it, it changed and you think, oh, I don't know where to move it now because it's moved. I've gone too far. I don't know. Where did I start from? So this one is a snapshot before you make the changes. And it is literally a snapshot of the histogram before you apply any change. Does that make sense to you? Are you following this? Are you following? If I go too fast, Louise, because Louise just fell off the chair. Okay? So, and can I tell you, Louise, I went to lip reading school, so I can read everything you're saying. So when you start to swear at me, I can see your lips moving. As they said in Only Fools and Horses, I know when you're lying because your lips are moving. Right. Okay. So what is this tone curve? So we know that this bit here, can you see my cursor moving, by the way?
Yes.
That's okay. I'm never sure with Zoom. I've got a histogram here. Yeah, this darker zone within that curves panel. What's that white line mean?
It means it's clipped.
No, there's a line from the bottom left corner to the top right-hand corner. What does that mean?
Actually,
Ooh, it's good, isn't it? Okay,
that's
I'm going to show you. I'm going to explain what it is. And I'm going to do it. I think I might do it with my annotate pen. Let's try this one, see if I can draw. I might have to draw it on a whiteboard for you. So this line here going up here is effectively a line that goes across here. So if I was to increase this zone here, just here in the shadows, that would reflect that point there in the shadows. And I know that because if I come back to my mouse and I'm going to go to the what we call the objective panel, which is here. So I'm going to go from this one back to this one here. Now, this one all down here, I'm just going to go through. I just want to just check one thing. I am saying that this point here, it would be that same point there. So if I was to raise the shadows up here now, it would effectively be moving it below that line. Now, this is a straight line, and so is that. So if I was to increase that, effectively, we'd like lifting this line up because that is the same line as goes across here. But the only difference being is this line on the histogram at the top, if I increase it there, remember what I said, and I'm going to just draw that, clear my drawings. I'm saying that that line, I have to get my pen, sorry. I would go effectively like that if I was to increase that zone, because we know that this area here is the shadows. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I increase it, and all these pixels here in this bottom would go that way. And if I said 10 points up. Do you all agree? And if I was to draw it on here, it would go like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that line is the same as what you would do if you drew a line on here at the top. So it would go up 10 points, back down and across. And that would go up there, effectively 10 points, going down and coming back down. So that line is effectively a line that would be linear across that histogram at the top. Now, as we said, if I was to do that in real time in a tone curve, so if I was to undo this, clear my drawings, if I were to do that in here, I would have to go get my mouse back. I would go to this point and I would have to click a point there and I would click a point there. And then it's going to be really tricky this because it's hard to do. Effectively, what I'm doing is that I can't bring it back. Curves are different. It's a lot thing, but effectively what I was trying to do is to create that square. Well, I can't because it's a curve. I can't create that bump because it's a curve. It's a natural. It's not a step change. So in here, get my mouse again, drawing. I can't do this on a curve. I can't do this on a curve. Okay, I can't attend that. What I can do on curves is this. In fact, if I draw it in a different color, I can create, oh, give me yellow again. Sorry, I didn't get yellow. I can create this on a curve, but I can't do the red square. Does that make sense here? I can come up here and I can create a curve. Yeah, but I can't do it. Now, what's the benefit of a curve is I don't get this square block. So if I always get my pen again, I'm saying that's what it would look like if I did it in shadows, but in a curves, it would look, oh, in fact, I'm going to use a different color. I'll get a different color just to make sure you understand. I'm saying you could create that as opposed to that square. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
It creates a curved line rather than a linear step change. So we see a linear step change in the red line. It goes, okay, I'm in the shadows, up at 10. And then when I get to that pixel, come back down. So I only affect those pixels and I lift them all up 10. The yellow line is what would be performed in the curve. So it's a more gradual increase and then a gradual decrease. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what's the benefits of having a curve over just doing it in highlights and shadows and whites. What's the benefit?
Well,
Gradual.
It's very gradual and we can be more precise. Not only that, we can shift the points of where we start and end, and we can also affect the rest of the histogram in any way we can without having these block changes. So let's just look at this. Oh, Louise is looking a little bit concerned now. Okay, so I'm now going to try and explain a little bit about the curves, and then when we've had a cup of tea, what time is it? So you will have a cup of tea, then I'll explain all these buttons and why, when we come into masking, we can use the controls for highlights, shadows, but we can also use curves. But one thing we can't, is very difficult to do in here, is certain color changes. We can add colors, but we can't do subtractive colors. So in using curves, we can introduce cyan, magenta, and yellow. So if you want to create a beautiful colored picture, let's say that Teresa's had somebody said, oh, I once saw some pictures of somebody's wedding and they look like movies. And what they used to do in the old movies, and they do because of the age of the film, some of the blues used to change and the reds, and you get this strange, you've seen probably pictures in your own photo albums from the 60s and 70s when they brought colour. They look this strange colour, don't they? They've lost the colour, haven't they?
Mm.
And they're using this nowadays to create some sort of feeling in your pictures when you come to do your films. So like, well, there's one that's just come out recently on Netflix about the woman that hid Anne Frank. But they've used the colour palette all the way through based upon as if the colours of that film has faded. So they do that, and you can do that, believe it or not, Roger and Tony, in Resolve, and we can do this on the whole film, part film, whatever. But obviously in the photography business, we do it on one image, okay? So before you all die of boredom, I'm now going to reset this, and then what we'll do, we will explain how it all works and what the buttons mean. And when you come to see what you can do with it, bearing in mind that I'm saying this, and I'm saying this not for Margaret, she tends to spend a lot more time on one image rather than lots of images. However, like Teresa, when she's doing a wedding, she gets a nice look on one image. You can then copy that to all the images. So what I'm saying is you can take your time on one and then say, well, actually, that'll work on that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And you can do that. And the beautiful thing about masking, the new masking technique, if Teresa did this and she said, oh, yeah, I've done this, oh, but that one is the sky's in a different place, don't worry, it will still find it. And it will apply it to the sky as a mask. Okay, so this is the great big jump in Lightroom. And people say, well, it's just a mask. It's a major step in image editing in most things for most of your pictures. So have a break, have a cup of tea. Teresa's going to go and have a lie down, and Louise is going to go and take a Valium. So we'll let you get that dealt with, and we'll give you 10 minutes, shall we? Okay, so let's have a little talk about this curves panel. So there are two ways we can look at using the tone curve. Now, bear in mind, we can use the tone curve, but it doesn't have to be in a mask. But the great thing about masking is that we can apply the tone facilities in specific regions. So let's first explain what this tone curve is and what it all means. There are there's 5 possible combinations of, or 5 possible uses of the tone curve. The first one, if you look on the panel on my screen at the moment, and I'll just make it bigger. Here we go. Can you see these 5 dots on my screen? This first one here is called parametric. I can't hover over it and point to it, sadly, but if you hover over it, it should tell you, it should say parametric curve. The next one is a point curve. So this is your point curve. So there's the 2. Then you've got a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And this is where color management comes in using these particular buttons. So I'll get rid of this a second. So the first one is parametric. Now, what that means is it's based upon regions. Now, we've said that in our basic panel, we have our blacks, our shadows, our exposure, our highlights, and our whites. That's the 5 tonal ranges. Okay, remember we looked at this? Yeah, and we had 5 regions. And if you look on here, we only have 4. And that's because the exposure is handled differently on a curve. But we have got these ranges: blacks, shadows, highlights, and whites. And the interesting thing is, when I hover over the different areas, it shows you where they are on that curve. Now, remember what we've said about a tone curve. I'm going to go back to this picture so we can see a real image. When we look at the shadows, and I hover over the shadows thing, if you look on that curves panel, can you see there's an area that's slightly lighter than the rest?
Yeah.
What it's saying is that if you're going to use parametric, you can set ranges so that you can't overcook certain points. And because it's shaped like it's because it's a gradual, it's a curve, it's a nice gentle swap. Now, remember when I did it before, and I'll just get my panel up, get my drawing pen, and we'll go back to red so you can see it. Now, remember before on here, we said if we did it in shadows, it would do something like that on this line here. You remember? We said if we said we want to increase, that's what it would do. And once it increased that by 10, and we said, let's say param figures 10, when it's finished, the histogram here tends to move that way. And that's because it takes that snapshot, then it overlays it over, and it said, oh, that pixel there now is 10, so it's going to end up being there, and that one is 9, it's going to end up being there, and that one's going to be there, and it will shift it to the right purely because it adds those extra light pixels to the histogram, and it looks like it's shifting it, but it's not, it's resampling. So it's adding, it's saying now that those in the shadows are no longer in the shadows, because I've got 10 more pixels, 10 more brightness levels than the pixel. So therefore, on the histogram, I now actually sit in the exposure range, not in the shadows. So when I look at it on here, clear all drawings, and I look at, I'll go back to mouse because I have to switch between. When I hover over the shadows now, have I got my mouse? There, you can see that I've got a range which it's telling me. So if I turn this up now, we'll go to the maximum. Can you see? Look, it follows those lines.
Yeah.
See those little grey areas? So that's it saying that that is effectively the same thing as if I was working in the shadows here, in that zone here. Yeah? So it's saying I'm going to get that. Instead of being a square shape, I'm going to make a nice curve. So it's, I wouldn't say it's the idiot's guide to tone curve, but it's a good starting point. Now the darks are there. So the lights are up the top end. Yeah, and the highlights are far end. So what it's saying is you can create very simple curves, and it will restrict you to how much you can do on there to create that nice curve. Because if I go any more, it becomes a step change, like a big square again, and we're back to big chunky changes. Now, the other thing is you'll notice that there are 4 zones. Can you see? We've got shadows, darks, lights, and highlights. Can you see those?
Yeah.
And what we're saying, I'm going to draw, because it's easy to draw. So we're saying that the shadows here is this range from here to there. You agree?
Yeah.
In fact, because there's no exposure, it actually goes a bit higher. So if I was to hover over here now on the shadows, you can see, look, it's even higher than I drew. So it's saying I can shift them and move them and smooth them out to make all that region there, which are the shadows, better. You see, that's brighter, that's darker. Okay. So I get my mouse back again, clear all the drawings. So the thing is, it's denoted by these markers here. And at the moment, it's splitting up into 25s. So unlike 0 to 255, it's trying to compress those into a grid 100 by 100. Hence, you get that diagonal line. Now, you could say, well, actually, I'm working in these shadows, Gary, but I want something a little bit more. Well, guess what? You can tell it where the range is. Now, on the histogram, when we go to basics, if we choose blacks, it's set there, isn't it? From there to there. And shadows are selected from there to there. So they're fixed zones. If you go back to your tone curve, you've still got them here, but guess what? You can change these and say, well, actually, that is now the shadows range, and that is the blacks range. Can you see? Look, I'm making that curve smaller now. I can't go any lower than 10, but now look what I've done. The shadows is only a small amount. Can you see that? If I turn this back up, taking it to almost up to 50, or I'll go to 50, now when I do the shadows, look how big the tone curve can be. So you can control how much or how big each zone is going to be. You could say that the shadows, I only want it to be that much, and I only want the highlights, and all the middle part here, the darks, are going to cover all the range. And you've got set levels there to there. So unlike the basic panel where these are fixed, you can actually set the zones where you want these to be. Yeah, you've got full control. And these are called regions. Now, the nice thing about these is that when you do this, you can control which area you're going to work on. So you're being much more selective, and it's not blocky. It's nice, smooth, very simple transitions. So we all know that when you see any changes on a photograph, they can be quite obvious. And you go, oh, look at that. Why have they done that? Well, you can be nice and smooth. Now, the other thing is, when you're working on these panels, you can right-click at any time and change Reset It All. I've made a mess of the regions here, look, so I'm going to reset the regions. Oops. I'm going to read regions and splits. There we go. So now I've reset all these back to their normal point. Now, just one other thing. You've got no control over the white and black points when you're in region, when you're in this parametric mode. You can't change. The end points are set, but the middle points you can change. And you can change them within the areas that are designated. And the areas are designated, and you can change those limits. So you've got quite a range on here to play with. So I'm going to reset all. So that is one method. That's parametric. The next one is points. And the thing is with points is, and bear in mind, I'm just going to go back to points. When you do points, you can set, you've got a couple of presets, which is medium contrast, as Linda says. It's an S-curve, and you can create more contrast. The interesting thing is we now have these two words, input and output. Now, what it's saying is the input is the point where you've selected and what value from 0 to 255. So if I come up to here, there, that is 255 right at the very end. Can you see in the top left-hand corner now? I can show, I don't think I can show it and move it, but in this top corner here, under where it says adjust, watch what happens when I hover over that point. Wherever I hover over a point, it's telling me what the input will be and the output before I change it. Okay? So that's what it is. Now, I said to you earlier, I can't move this point here. But in this linear, in the points mode, I can make the whites become, the blacks become whites, and the whites become black. And does that recognize a negative you used to take to your, I'll just turn all these off so you can't. That looks like the negative you used to take to Boots to get your color pictures done. Yeah, because that's exactly what it is, negative. Okay, so you can now move these points anywhere you like. So we could say, if we talked about this picture here, we could say, I'll reset that. Reset it. We have this black to white. Now we know that this in the middle here is going to be 50% black, 50% white. Yeah, we know that. And you can see it's got a bathtub effect. Interestingly enough, we do know as well that for some reason, Lightroom, when it interprets the black zones here into something a little bit darker, yeah, I've got no whites. And that is because the black shadows, when you get to this end, there's very little information in here. So it's very chunky. So if I was to add all the pixels up from there to there, as a numerical value, that area would represent literally a slither down this right-hand side. It's mathematical. You don't need to know that, but this is why we always say, do you shoot to the right? Do you shoot for the shadows, or do you shoot for the exposure? If you shoot for the shadows, then there's less chance of that blue line of forming at that end. If you shoot for the highlights to protect, you get more whites, but then the blacks become more blocky. So it's down to the type of camera you use and what effect you want. So what about this tone curve? What about it? Well, you can put a point anywhere on here. And you can see if I was to put a point bang in the middle at 125, I'll go 125, so it's about there. If I move it down, it's saying now the input was 133 or 135, but now it's become 110. And because the output value is less than the input value, and we can drag it this way as well, left and right, it means it's going to get darker because the number's getting less. If I move it the other way, ooh, I'll put an extra point on there. Ooh. Sorry, I've just clicked on the wrong one. If I was to go lighter, then obviously you'll now start to see that that white will come in. Can you see? So I'm clipping. So now I'm at the very top. If I carry it over here, I should clip all of it because I'm turning all the pixels almost to white. Do you see that? I can't go below 4. So you can now see mathematically that those 4 pixels at the far end I can't change are all dark. So from a mathematical point of view, that region there, although it constitutes probably an 1/8 of the whole overall picture from left to right, you can see that if I did the same the other end, it would be only about 1/2 a pixel because the way the maths works. It's the way binary works and the way the maths works, the way your sensor works, but that's how that is. So that is that. I'm going to reset this. We're back to where we were. Okay, so what's the benefits of this? Well, you can, as we quite rightly said, we can say, I want to make, let's say, for example, I want to make, on my photograph, this area lighter. Okay, let's say that on this picture here that we're working on here, in fact, we can do it on a picture, but I want to show on there because it's easier. Oops. I want to make, say, this area, these shadows lighter. So I'm going back to my range, and that's roughly where they are. How do I find that on this curve? Anybody? How can I find that point? What do I need to know?
Well,
It's
you've
the
got a
point-
little thing in the left-hand corner, haven't you?
You have, you can do it by doing it on here, by selecting a point. Or, as Margaret quite rightly said, there is a little eyedropper tool here, the select tool. And if I bring that on, wherever I hover, now look in the curves panel to my right as I'm doing this. As I'm going from left to right, it's at the top corner. I'm coming down, I'm coming down, I'm coming down, I'm coming down, coming down, coming down, till it's in the black. So I'm saying somewhere about here, oh, I weren't bad, was it? Look at that. That's not a bad shot, was it? I'm saying I want to affect that area there. So if I wanted to affect another area, let's say I want to make an S-curve, as Linda said, and I click here, I've now put 2 points on that curve. And these are anchor points, and you can have as many as you like, but trust me, the more you have, the more difficult it is to control. So if I was to grab this bottom point now and drag it down and find the other one at the top, move it up, we've now got our S-curve. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So that line, if I was to draw it on here, and I get my drawing pencil again, and if I was doing it on the histogram, what I'm doing is I'm bringing this down and I'm making this bit lighter. That makes sense to you?
Yeah.
So any pixels down here from
Yeah.
up,
Picture, Gary,
I beg your pardon?
can you show us that on that actual picture where you drew that circle on the house?
This one here, yeah, I will do. But I'm just showing you, so that curve there, we're saying it starts at this point here. We're coming down, I went too low, and then I'm saying going high. So I've created that. So any pixels in this zone goes up, and any pixels in this zone goes down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas before it was change like that. So you can see a curve is much more smooth and much more gradual and much more controlled. Can you understand why I've drawn that on there and it matches that on the tone curve? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're turning things up and down, but instead of a straight line, it's a smooth line because it is a curve. So going back to what you said, Linda, I'll clear the drawings off. And if I go to this picture, so let's say we want to increase this area in the trees. I'm going to reset the picture because we've been playing with it. Now we want to increase, we know that we've got some, oh, I didn't clear my drawings, 1 second, my apologies, clear all drawings. We want to work in this area just here. It's a little bit dark, isn't it? Just get my drawing pencil. We want to improve the shadows in this area here. So what we can do is we want to know whereabouts on this tone curve we need to go to get that. Now, Margaret's right in what she said. We get our mouse, we click on this one, we come into the area. Now, look, as I'm moving, can you see it on the curves? Let me just clear the drawings off. So as over it, as I go through them, it's telling you whereabouts that luminosity level is on that curve. We say we want to probably go from there downwards and lighten it up. So I can say, well, I want to be that point there. I'll put a point on there. And then I also want to point probably about here, which is a darker point. Now that's quite a tight curve, but I'm going to have a go at this. So what we're saying is we're going to, whoops, we want to pull this down. Now this is where the anchor points come in. If you have too many, it can get a bit messy, but what we're going to do, we're going to lighten these up. Lighten them all up. So we can make these a bit brighter. And if it's really down to 0, you can pick this black point up and you can raise it up. So we can say, I want it to be there. Now look at the gap here. Can you see in the histogram? We've got no blacks. As near as damn it, you saw in that gradient that I can't get rid of any blacks. It's always got something there. Can't have 0 blacks, sadly, as in no blacks whatsoever. You've got to have a pixel. But you can see now, I've said, I've moved that point here from the bottom and above the top of the curve. So I'm saying anything now in this zone, instead of starting at black, I want to start at slightly black. And look, our picture, we start at something slightly black. So you can see the link between the curves panel and that of the histogram. Okay, are you happy with that?
So can you apply this when you go into masking and say you mask the subject?
Yes, we can. And this is the beautiful thing about it, because we know curves is a nice gradual thing and we can use it to change colour. So let's say I want to change the colour of that building. I can change the colour quite easily as well by selecting it and using colours. Let's say that you want to make this look a little bit more, well, we'll do it in a minute. We'll make the sky look a little bit more orangey in the highlights and say very cool in the shadows. So you get this lovely evening colour sky. Let me just finish off where we are on here. So these are points. Yeah, these are the points. And you can delete points. So if you want to get rid of one, you just click on it and delete control points. So you can take these points off. And remember, you can also, I'll get rid of that one, delete control point. You can also slide these up so you can move it left and right. Yeah, you can move it anywhere you like. Once you've got that point, you can move it to wherever you like. So you've got a lot of control over it. I'm going to reset the whole panel. So we've got to reset the curves. So you have got an amazing amount of changes. Now then, where else can we take this? Well, when you're in masking, you have not got control over certain things. You can do ranges now, which is good. So we can select a range and we can create a mask. And then when you've created this mask, so let's say we're going to go to sky. So let's select the sky. And we're all going to do this together in a minute, but I'll just show you this. We can change temperature of the sky, but it's global. So whenever I change that, everywhere across your histogram, it will apply it in that sky. So we can make it blue or more yellow. I'm just going to move my panel out of the way so I can see everybody. And you can see as I'm changing the color, depending where the pixels are in that range. So down at the blue end, it's going to be down in the shadows here. Because look, all the blues are down in the shadows, but in the highlights, look at the yellows and the highlights in the histogram. So if I go that way now, that's only the yellows. I'm getting close to the top, but the highlights of the yellow aren't burnt out, aren't clipped, but they're just above the house. But if I go back to the blue is quite arranged. Blue is across all the sky, because the sky tends to be blue tinge, isn't it? A little bit cooler. So you've got a limit to what you can do in here with just these panels. However, we could always use the curves. So we have curves. So we could actually get the blues and we can change the colors on these masks. Now, let's come back to this one here. We can, once we've done these color changes, I'm going to let me just explain a bit of color changes. And I think what we'll do is we'll have a go at this as a group. So let me just get this one here. I'm going to just pull that away from there because I can't see what I'm doing. So once we've got our sky up here, we know we can change the sky. We can bring down the shadows, or the highlights is a good one. And we can do this, and we can put the white. So we can got control over the sky. And we know if I want to work on the foreground, how could I work on the foreground?
Invert.
So what do we do first?
Copy.
Yeah. Now remember one thing, and I noticed one or two you were saying this the other week. If I copy a mask, yeah, we're going to copy this mask. Whoops. Just get it back to the mask. We can duplicate mask 1. Yeah. But notice one thing. When I duplicate it, all the changes go with it. You see that? So I've got that mask and that mask are identical. Now, it might be that if we're going to invert this, and I'm going to invert the mask, those changes, these highlights, are now affecting this area. So it's transferred all those changes to the foreground. So if I've done a lot in the sky and I've put a gradient and all different things on as components, remember a mask is made up of components, these. So if I was to add a gradient, let's put a load of gradient on here. And let's do this, and let's make the exposure a little bit darker. Oh, there we go. Let's change that. So we've got a linear gradient. There we go. So we can change all these with a bit of blue on there. Oh, I'm on the wrong mask. It helps it be on the right mask. Cancel. Linear gradient, we're okay on there. So what we're saying is that we can change this. And if I make another copy of this, if I delete this, let's do it again, because it wasn't quite good. So I'll do a change to this. I'll put a linear gradient on there. Linear gradient, I'm going to put a bit of blue in there. That should do that on there. Any changes I make on here, if I do a duplicate now, those changes, when I invert it, will go to the foreground. Can you see? So it's all right doing an inversion, but watch when you do inversion, because any changes you made to the mask that you're inverting will carry forward. So if you've got any darkness, all this will suddenly become dark. So you're better off, I always get this bloody delete all mask. Delete mask 1 copy. If I was going to do this foreground, I would do this. I would do select sky, and then I would invert it, and then you've got control over the bottom. Yeah, does that make sense? So be careful when you're doing this. If you've done some work to the sky and you suddenly say, I want to invert it, anything you've done to the sky, when you invert it, it will apply it in reverse, upside down, to the image below. to the foreground below. Okay. Now then, I'm going to explain a little bit about these. I'm going to watch in time as well because I want to get, oh, cry, I'm not going to get a chance to do all the colours. I'll explain the colours now. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll tone this picture to make it look like an antique, or we're going to put colour in the sky. We're going to change the colours of the sky. We're going to change quite a range on this using masks and curves. Okay. What I'll do a brief handout, a little bit about these curves. Yeah. Will that help you?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go back to curves generally. I'm outside the mask now. I'm not in my mask. I'm in basic. If I wanted to change the colors, now remember this color wheel. We looked at this, didn't we? Yeah. So when we're working in these colors, I'm going to get rid of the clipping mask because it'll confuse, because we know white's clipped and we know black's clipped because it's black and white. So if I was to go to the red channel, we are working here now in the red. Yeah, pen. We're working in this, oh, we're working in this zone. Red on red, you can't see it. We're working in this red zone. And this is this area here. And of course, that one would be this area here. And guess where the line's going to go? Over to here. So they're the three zones. Now then, remember, if I look in the red here, this is the red area. It's complementary is there. So what color is this bit here now? Anybody know what that color is?
White, grey.
I'll give you a clue. I'm going to get a yellow. Yeah, let's get a yellow pen. What's the opposite of red?
Cyan.
Correct. So if I was to grab this now and move that up, the reds become red. And look, I'm adding more and more red to it. And if I go the other way, I'm adding more cyan to it. Yeah. Okay. So that's those two. I'm going to reset this. So if I now go to green, what's the opposite of green?
Blue.
Magenta.
Oh,
Magenta. Yeah, so there. So if I go to blue, what's the opposite of blue?
Yellow.
Yellow, exactly. So remember this thing. So anything opposite in its colors is opposite look. So cyan, magenta, and yellow. Now then, notice one other thing. The magenta and the yellows seem to be a lot stronger than the cyan. Cyan tends to be a smaller value, and that's purely because the way we see, and also on the color gamut that we use in our computer, the cyan isn't always the strongest of the color. Yellow and magenta is very strong. Cyan is very a lot less. So you can see that it's not equal. So the magenta area and the yellow area is different to the cyan. You all see that? Yeah?
yeah.
Okay. Now then, so while all this transpose out, let's get the draw. Let's clear all the drawings. And let's go back to our picture. So if I was to choose one of these are the colors one. So if I move that from the middle point upwards, what would it do to the picture?
And
Turn
it
it
reddish.
More red. And sure enough, it does. So what if I go the other way?
Turn it blue or cyan.
Cyan, yeah, so it's going to turn it to cyan, yeah. And you can control how much and what level you're going to do that to. So what about the green? If I turn it that way, it's going to be more green. What about the other way?
Magenta.
Magenta, yeah, you get a magenta. So if you got a magenta cast, let's say this image was like this, you came into here, you could say, well, actually, if I know that magenta is in there, why don't I go to there and move it back to green to correct it? And you can recorrect colored images. So let's say that Teresa's done a wedding, and in the wedding, on the wall, there's a problem. She tries a white balance and she can't quite get it because there's no grey. You can't quite get it. Oh, God, Gary, how can I get around this? It's still got this horrible pinky cast. Well, think of the colour. Think of the opposite colour and then change it. Yeah, you can come in here and correct the colour. So I'm going to reset this panel. Let's reset this one. So if I go to blue, well, we all know what the opposite of blue is.
Yellow.
Yellow. So we can put yellow. And it's interesting, we talk about grass is green. Look at this. How much yellow affects the grass?
Mm.
Very little. So it must be almost green, that yellow, that grass. We always say grass is green, but it's more yellow than green. So this is very, very helpful for color correction and also excellent for adding some very interesting features. Now, I think when I've shown you this, and I'm going to do this next week, because I ain't got, if I start it now, because we're going to do it together, we're not going to finish it. So I'm going to leave this next part till next week. But when Margaret comes to do some of her pictures, we can do split toning, which is now taken out of here, by the way, because they say, well, you should know how to split tone. We can now in masking create a very refined split toning effect. So we can have a very subtle sky, which looks natural rather than painted on, into the sky. So we can have all our highlights as yellow and orange. So like the sun is setting or it's coming from behind the cloud. And we all know that normally a sky is blue, isn't it? So if we have the shadows of more of a blue and the highlights as more of an orangey red, it looks perfect, dramatic sky. So we're going to teach you how to do that. So what time is it? We've got 5 minutes to recap. I think we should have a few questions and answers. Is there anything specific that you want me to just cover? I don't want to answer a few questions.
Just one, no, so
Yeah.
if you go and create a mask,
Yep.
select the sky and use this curve to change what bits and
Correct.
pieces.
Correct. And I say I want to do it all together, so we'll do that together next week. We'll on this picture next week, we'll turn it into an evening setting. So we'll have the sky looking like an evening. We'll also, and the reason, you see, this is a tricky picture. Now, when I saw this, I thought, oh, this is good for one reason. If you use the sky, notice the sky, the clouds are going over that hill in the distance, that mountainous region, the distance. So when you do select sky, let's do it, you'll see I have a problem. So I'm going to delete these masks. I'll delete all masks. If I do select sky, what's going to happen?
It'll cover that bit in the mountain.
Yeah, look, it's struggling, isn't it? It thinks it's part of the sky, which it is to some degree, but you get this fall off. There's no defined area. There's a bit of a fall off here. There's definitely a fall off here, look. So the sky has actually gone into the building. So we would actually need to subtract this using a brush, and we use our straight line, don't we? We can use I'm going to get it to there, making sure my automask is on, which I didn't do. And we can draw a straight line, holding the shift key down, and get rid of any imperfections. You see, this roof's gone a bit strange, isn't it? So we can get rid of these. See, these masks aren't always perfect. They're good starting points, but you might find you'll have to amend them. See, it's gone to the sky. It shows some of this roof as the sky. It even shows that window as the sky, look. And that part of the roof.
I've had a bug with brush this week. I use it a lot.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working at all. So
Okay.
I went on like a forum and it said, and I've noticed yours, you have to have your density, flow, feather all at 100% to be able to use it. It wasn't like that before.
No, it certainly isn't, look, because if I can bring that down, I can change that still. So
Mine wasn't working.
you got to
Once I turned it up to 100% density, it worked then.
Okay, we'll have a look at that then, shall we, next week? Make a note of that on a bit of paper, Teresa, for next week, and we'll recreate that to see if there's an error in it, yeah? Okay, so that's that one. So, yeah, so you can see, Linda, that, yeah, this would struggle a little bit with the sky, but we just tidy it up. These masks and anything you do like this are never perfect. You need to make some adjustments somewhere, yeah? So in answer to that question there, yeah, we could do all sorts down to the sky. We can put some purple in it, and we can put some blue in it, but so we can do whatever we wish to that now. But we are, whatever we do in these here are global. We can't sort of say, well, I want that. You could, and we could try this. We could create a luminance one, and then choose the highlights and make them orange, and choose the shadows blue. But I know that it's difficult to do because you're limited on what you can do on these. With the curves, you've got total control over it all. And that's the difference. That's the basic difference between that and the old method. So the curves introduction into masking is a big, big game changer. And once you learn to use it, you'll say, oh, that's really good. I want to make my own sky. I like that. But Ron's got a picture up in the Highlands. And I thought of that, and I looked at that when I did it, and I've looked at Ron's picture, and I did do the sky, made it look warmer, then warmed the picture up, and it looked great. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So this is curves. Curves and masking are now together. They are incredible. And also, when we come to do composites, we now know that you can bring layers of smart objects into Photoshop. And then let's say Teresa did some pictures and weddings, she'd moved them across, and she did so, and then she realized it was too dark. She made some changes in Photoshop using the raw editor, and then came back in back into Lightroom and suddenly thought, but that's changed that picture. Make a virtual copy. All the settings have come back. Smart objects means it's two directions. When you do non-smart objects, you create a new TIFF file and you create a totally new file. And when you save it in Photoshop and come back to Lightroom, all your edits that you've got down the right-hand side have all gone back to zero because it's a new file. Whereas a smart object into Photoshop and then come back in, all your settings are there so you can continue to make changes afterwards. So we'll cover that. We'll see if we can get it done next week, but certainly next week we'll do this, and then we'll look at doing something like that. So if Ron's suddenly winning in Scotland and he wants to show a picture of him playing the bagpipes in the Highlands, we can do that now quite easily and without any destructive method. Because remember, Photoshop, when you go into Photoshop, you're working on pixels. But the nice thing about smart objects, you don't work on the pixels, you work on them, but as a preview, and then come back into Lightroom. So it's like having Lightroom within Photoshop, which is absolutely brilliant. Okay, what time is it? So I've got, oh, crikey, yeah. So anybody else got any questions? Been a bit of a brainstorm for you this week, hasn't it, really? Teresa, she's gone from blonde to grey now. But I mean, from Margaret and Teresa's point of view, where they're doing commercial or photographic competitions, some of these are very, very good for you. And the nice thing about it, Teresa, you think you've got a wedding and you've got a nice sky, and you want to keep that sky, you can save that as a preset, or you can just say copy, just drag and copy on the last change and synchronize them to 10 pictures. And all that fancy work you've done on one applies to them all. And then when you look at them in a photo album, they're all the same.
Just to let you know, my heart sung this week. My bride turned up in a pure white satin dress. And what does the camera do? Turns it blue.
Well, we can help you. Have you got a save that? Bring a picture for next week then.
But the way I've sorted it on some of the photos where it's got a bluey tinge is go into my mask and then select people.
Yeah.
Then select clothing, and then I can just warm it up to make it look white again.
Yep. Okay. There you go. You see, she's getting good at it. Okay, so I've got a picture from Ron that is good. If Emma's got any pictures that you want to have a go at using curves on, any landscapes or anything you want to do, just make sure you send me a copy for next week.
Got half a dozen of mine, haven't you?
Yeah, I have indeed. Yeah. Okay. So now you can go and take a brain pill, lay down in the dark room, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Talk to you next week, and I'll talk to you guys later on.
Soon.
Don't forget crib sheet.
Is he gone?
No, I'm still here. I'm just.
Don't forget the afternoon. Oh, and the crib sheet.
Yeah.